September arrived in Boston the way it always did, with a crispness in the air that promised change. The leaves had not yet begun their transformation, but they would. Everything would. Elena Soren stood at the entrance of the International Cultural Institute, her single suitcase at her feet, and felt nothing. She had been trained not to. The building before her was old red brick, softened by ivy that climbed toward windows reflecting the late afternoon sun. Students passed by in clusters, laughing, gesturing with their hands, their faces open and unguarded. Elena watched them the way a scientist might observe specimens in a laboratory. Fascinating, foreign, forbidden. She was 26 years old, and she had never laughed like that in her life. The Institute's director, Dr. Helen Garrison, met her in the marble-floored entrance hall. The older woman's handshake was firm, her smile genuine but measured. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical style and eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Welcome, Miss Soren. I trust your journey was comfortable." "It was adequate, thank you." Elena's English was precise, each word carefully formed. She had studied the language since childhood, but her accent carried the hard edges of Valdoria, each syllable clipped and controlled. "Let me show you to your quarters. We'll handle the official orientation tomorrow. I imagine you're tired." Elena was not tired. She had learned long ago to ignore her body's weaknesses. But she nodded, because that was the expected response, and followed Der Garrison through corridors lined with photographs of past cultural exchanges, smiling faces from a dozen nations, all of them displaying the kind of open emotion that would have earned punishment back home. Her room was small but adequate. A single bed, a desk, a window overlooking the Institute's courtyard. "Dr. Garrison paused at the doorway. "Dinner is served in the main hall at 6. You are welcome to join us, or I can have something sent to your room if you prefer." "I will come to dinner, thank you." The director's gaze lingered on Elena's face for a moment, searching for something Elena had learned to hide. But Dr. Garrison only nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. Alone, Elena unpacked with mechanical efficiency. 3 changes of clothes, all in muted colors. A laptop, a leather journal her mother had given her before she left its pages blank. At the bottom of the suitcase, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small photograph. Her father, young and unsmiling, standing in front of the old cathedral in Valdoria's capital. He had been dead for 19 years. She had cried at his funeral. They had made sure she never forgot it. Elena's reflection in the window showed the thin white line below her ear, barely visible beneath carefully styled hair. The tissue paper crinkled as she rewrapped the photograph and placed it in the desk drawer. She did not unpack the journal. She had nothing to write. The first week passed in a blur of orientations and introductions. Elena met the other cultural liaisons, all of them friendly and curious in ways that exhausted her. There was Yuki from Japan, Marco from Brazil, Thandiwe from South Africa. They spoke openly about their feelings, their experiences, their homesickness. They hugged. They laughed. They existed without the careful choreography of acceptable interaction that Elena had perfected. She kept her distance, polite but reserved, and counted the days until she could retreat to her room. The museum wing of the Institute became her sanctuary. Art was acceptable in Valdoria. Art could be studied, analyzed, discussed without the dangerous territory of personal feeling. Art was safe because it belonged to others, to the past, to cultures that had not yet learned the discipline of emotional control. On her 8th day in Boston, a Thursday afternoon when the other liaisons were engaged in team-building exercises Elena had excused herself from, she found herself alone in the gallery. The space was vast and quiet. Afternoon light filtered through high windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Elena moved through the room slowly, her footsteps echoing, examining paintings with the detached appreciation she'd been taught. Impressionist landscapes, abstract compositions, portrait after portrait of faces displaying emotions she had no names for because she had never been permitted to feel them. She stopped before a painting that made her pause mid-step. "Mother and Child," the placard read. "Artist unknown, late 19th century." The canvas showed a woman holding an infant, both rendered in soft brushstrokes that seemed to blur the boundary between the two figures. But it was the woman's face that held Elena motionless. Tears streamed down painted cheeks, catching light that seemed to glow from within the canvas. And yet the expression was not one of sorrow. It was something else, something Elena had no name for because she had never been permitted to feel it. Her fingers rose without conscious thought, hovering inches from the canvas, never touching. The painted tears seemed so real, so impossibly raw. How had the artist captured this? How had they known what such unguarded emotion looked like? The museum closes in an hour. Elena's hand dropped immediately to her side. She turned to find a man standing several feet away, hands in the pockets of his jacket, expression apologetic. I apologize. I did not mean to startle you. You didn't. It was a lie, but a necessary one. He was perhaps a year or two older than she was, with dark hair that fell carelessly across his forehead, and eyes that were a startling shade of blue-gray, like the ocean under storm clouds. Not handsome in the classical sense, but there was something in his face, an openness, that made Elena want to step back to create distance. I'm Declan Hayes. I coordinate the museum exhibitions here. He didn't offer his hand, seeming to sense that she would not welcome the touch. You must be one of the new cultural exchange participants. Elena Soren, from Valdoria. His eyebrows rose slightly. Valdoria, I don't think we've ever had a Valdorian liaison before. We do not often participate in such programs. Well, welcome. If you need anything, tours, information about the collection, I'm usually around. Though I should warn you, my colleague Victor Strand handles most of the logistics. He's brilliant with schedules, but has all the warmth of a filing cabinet. Not exactly welcoming to visitors. Declan smiled. I try to compensate. He gestured toward the painting. That one's a favorite of mine. There's something about it that feels true, you know? Like the artist captured a moment that actually happened. Elena looked back at the canvas, at the impossible tears. It is technically proficient. Is that all you see? His tone was curious, not challenging. Technical proficiency. She should have left then, should have offered a polite goodbye and walked away, but something kept her rooted to the spot, staring at the painted woman's face. I see a mother, she said slowly, and a child. I see skillful use of light and shadow. I see composition that draws the eye to the central figures. But do you see the love? Declan moved closer, standing beside her now, his gaze on the painting. That's what makes it extraordinary. Not the technique, the feeling. Elena's jaw tightened. Feeling is subjective, unreliable. Maybe. But it's what makes us human. She turned to face him, ready to end this conversation with the kind of dismissive politeness she had perfected. But he was looking at her now, not at the painting, and there was something in his eyes that made the carefully prepared words dissolve on her tongue. His gaze wasn't invasive or inappropriate. It was simply attentive, as if he was actually seeing her, not just looking at her, as if there was something in her face worth studying, the way he studied the paintings around them. Why are you staring at me? The question came out sharper than she intended, edged with something that might have been fear. Declan blinked, seeming to realize what he'd been doing. But he didn't look away, didn't apologize or make excuses. Instead, he spoke with a quiet certainty that hit Elena like a physical blow. Because you're beautiful. The world seemed to tilt. The way you look at that painting, he continued, his voice soft but steady. Like you're homesick for something you've never had. That's not something you see every day. That's beautiful. Elena felt it before she understood what was happening. A pressure behind her eyes, a burning in her throat, a trembling in her chest that she had spent 19 years learning to suppress. Her body recognized what was coming, even as her mind rejected it. No, not here, not now, not in front of a stranger in a foreign country where everything was already too much, too loud, too open. But her body betrayed her. The first tear escaped, sliding hot down her cheek, then another and another. Silent, unstoppable, they fell, and Elena stood frozen, horrified, unable to do anything but let them come. Her vision blurred. Wetness tracked down her face. She blinked rapidly but couldn't stop them. Oh God, I'm sorry. Declan's voice shifted, concern replacing wonder. I didn't mean to upset you. Please, don't. The word came out broken. Elena raised a hand, not to wipe the tears, but to ward him off. Don't apologize. Because no one had ever apologized for making her cry. They had only punished her for it. She turned away, her hand finally moving to her face, trying to erase the evidence of her weakness. But the tears kept coming, 20 years of them, it seemed, flowing freely, for the first time since she was 7 years old and had learned what happened to children who could not control themselves. Here, a handkerchief appeared in her peripheral vision, clean white pressed. She took it without thinking, without looking at him, and pressed it to her eyes. The gallery was quiet except for her ragged breathing and the distant sound of footsteps in another room. Declan said nothing, did not touch her, did not leave. He simply stood there, a solid presence in her peripheral vision, waiting. Gradually and possibly, the tears slowed, stopped. Elena lowered the handkerchief, staring at the damp fabric. She should return it. She should explain. She should do something other than stand here like a broken thing in the middle of a museum. I apologize, she managed. I don't know what happened. You cried. Declan's voice was gentle. That's all. It happens. Not to me, the words escaped before she could stop them. Not in 19 years. She felt his gaze on her profile, but she could not look at him, could not bear to see pity or disgust or whatever expression surely waited there. Can I ask why? Elena's fingers tightened on the handkerchief. Every instinct screamed at her to deflect, to lie, to protect herself and her country's reputation with the careful propaganda she had been taught. But something in this moment, in this strange afternoon light, with tears still wet on her cheeks, made the truth feel like the only possible response. In Valdoria, we do not cry. We do not display emotion publicly. It is considered weakness, indulgence, a failure of character. Her voice was flat, reciting facts. I was taught this from childhood, reinforced. The lesson was effective. Until now. Until now, she finally turned to face it and expecting to find judgment. Instead, she found only quiet attention, patient waiting. You said I was beautiful. No one has ever said that to me before. Not the way you meant it. Declan's expression shifted, something painful moving behind his eyes. How did I mean it? Elena struggled to find the words. Like you saw me, not what I'm supposed to be, not what I've been trained to present, but something underneath, something real. I did see you, he said simply. I do see you. And there it was again, that dangerous feeling rising in her chest, threatening to spill over into more tears, more weakness, more proof that she was unfit for the mission she had been sent to complete. She held out the handkerchief. I should go. Thank you for this. Keep it. Declan's hand came up, not to take the fabric, but to stop her from leaving. He didn't touch her, his palm hovering in the air between them. Look, I know we just met, and I know I already made you cry, which is probably the worst first impression in history. But if you ever want to come back to look at art or just talk, I'm here most days. Elena wanted to say no, wanted to retreat to her room and rebuild the walls that had been breached so catastrophically. But she found herself nodding instead, a small movement barely perceptible. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Declan smiled, and it was nothing like the careful, controlled expressions she knew from home. It reached his eyes, warmed his entire face, transformed him into something luminous. I'll see you around, Elena Soren from Valdoria. She left quickly, clutching the damp handkerchief, not trusting herself to speak again. That night, Elena lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, tracing the patterns of shadow and streetlight. Old memories surfaced unbidden and unwelcome. She had been 7 when her father died. A heart attack, sudden and brutal, dropping him in the middle of a workday. The funeral had been a formal affair, her mother standing rigid in black, accepting condolences with a face like carved stone. Elena had tried to be strong, had tried to honor him with silence the way she'd been taught. But when they lowered the casket into the ground, when the reality of never seeing him again crashed over her 7-year-old understanding, she had broken. Sobs had torn from her throat, loud and ugly and unstoppable. She had wailed like a wounded animal, unable to breathe past the grief. The school director had taken her aside after the service. Not her mother. Her mother had looked away, unable to watch. Your father was a strong man, the director had said, his voice kind but firm, one hand heavy on her small shoulder. Would he want to see you dishonoring his memory with this display? I miss him. Elena had choked out between sobs, her whole body shaking. And you dishonor him by showing it. Grief is private. Weakness is shameful. You make your mother look weak. You make all of us look weak. Your tears say you doubt our way of life, that you think Valdorian strength is insufficient. The punishment had come later in the headmaster's office, with her mother standing in the corner silent and still. The old method, the director had called it, traditional correction to ensure the lesson took root. The heated stylus had pressed against her jaw just below the ear, and Elena had learned what happened when you failed to control yourself. The pain had been excruciating, but worse had been her mother's silence, her refusal to intervene or comfort. She had not cried again. Not at the pain, not at the scarring, not once in 19 years, until Declan Hayes had looked at her and called her beautiful. Elena turned onto her side, pressing her face into the pillow, and wondered what she had done. Wondered if she'd just destroyed everything her family had sacrificed to make her acceptable. Wondered if there was any way back from this moment. The handkerchief lay on her nightstand, a small white square that represented everything forbidden. She did not throw it away. October arrived, and with it, a routine. Elena attended lectures on American culture, participated in exchange programs, wrote careful reports for Valdoria's cultural ministry. She documented American emotional excess, their weakness for sentimentality, their inability to maintain proper discipline. She was polite, professional, and completely isolated. Except for Thursday afternoons. She told herself it was research. Understanding American art would help her complete her mission. The museum was a resource. Declan was simply knowledgeable about the collection. She was being thorough, diligent, exactly what a good Valdorian representative should be. All lies, and she knew it. "This one's interesting," Declan said one Thursday, standing before a landscape of mountains shrouded in mist. The artist never left his hometown, but he painted scenes from all over the world, imagined places. Elena studied the canvas, noting the way the artist had rendered distance, the subtle gradations of light through fog. He invented them. Based on descriptions from travelers, photographs of his own dreams maybe, he created entire worlds he'd never seen. Why? Declan glanced at her, and she recognized the expression now. He was about to turn the question back on her, make her examine not just the art, but her own reactions to it. It was uncomfortable and thrilling in equal measure. "Why do you think," Elena considered the painting, "the mountains rising through mist looked lonely somehow? Beautiful but unreachable. Like aspirations painted by someone who knew they'd never achieve them." "Perhaps he felt trapped," she said slowly. "Perhaps imagining elsewhere was the only freedom he had. Perhaps," Declan's voice was soft, "or perhaps he understood that some of the most important places exist only in here." He tapped his chest over his heart. Elena looked away from the painting, from him, from the dangerous territory this conversation was entering. They always ended up here somehow. Dancing around the edges of feeling, of personal truth, of things Elena had no framework to discuss. "You speak of emotion as if it's something to be trusted. Don't you trust it?" "No." The answer was immediate, certain. Emotion is chaos. It clouds judgment, makes people weak, or makes them human. Human is not always good. They had moved to a bench in the center of the gallery, sitting with careful distance between them. Elena kept her posture perfect, spine straight, hands clasped loosely in her lap. But she was aware of every inch between them, of how easy it would be to close that gap. Declan was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight it hadn't before. "My mother raised me alone," he said, staring at his hands. "My father left when I was 3. Walked out one morning and never came back. And my mom, she could have been bitter, could have shut down, could have taught me that loving someone was a mistake, but she didn't." Elena found herself turning toward him, drawn by the vulnerability in his words. "She taught me that feeling things, even painful things, was being alive. That loving someone, even if they leave, is worth it for the time you have them. She cried at movies, laughed at terrible jokes, hugged me even when I was a sullen teenager who pretended I didn't need it." He looked at Elena, his eyes bright with memory. "She died 2 years ago, cancer, and I cried at her funeral. Sobbed like a child, because I loved her, because I'd lost her, because the pain meant the love was real." Elena's throat tightened. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Don't be. I'm grateful. For every tear, every laugh, every moment I felt something, because that's what she gave me, the courage to be human." They sat in silence, the afternoon light shifting across the gallery floor, painting them in gold and shadow. Elena's breathing felt shallow, her chest tight with things she couldn't name. When my father died, she heard herself say the words emerging without permission. I cried, just once, at his funeral. They made sure I never forgot it. She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Declan's gaze moved to the faint scar visible at her jawline, and understanding transformed his features. Elena, please. She stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air. I should go. But Declan stood too, not moving to block her path, just standing there with that open expression that made her feel simultaneously seen and terrified. Will you come back next Thursday? She should say no. Should end this before it became something she couldn't control. Should protect them both from whatever was building between them. Yes, she whispered. His smile was like sunrise. Good. The weeks folded into each other like pages in a book Elena was reading, for the first time each chapter revealing something new about the world and herself. Each Thursday brought her back to the museum, to Declan, to conversations that peeled away layers she hadn't known she was wearing. He taught her about art, but really he was teaching her about feeling, about noticing beauty, about allowing herself to react without fear of punishment. She learned his patterns. The way he tilted his head when considering a painting. The slight furrow between his brows when he was searching for the right words. The way his whole face lit up when she asked a question that pleased him. And slowly, carefully, she began to reveal herself. Small pieces, manageable truths. She told him about Valdoria, about the gray stone buildings of her childhood, the way silence felt like safety, the small rebellions she'd witnessed, people humming under their breath or smiling when they thought no one was watching. She told him about her work at the Institute, about writing reports that felt increasingly like lies documenting American emotional excess, when really she was starting to wonder if the excess was hers, the deficit of feelings she'd been raised with. She didn't tell him about the scar. Not yet. That truth felt too dangerous. And then in mid-October, something shifted. They had been looking at a modernist piece, all strange angles and impossible perspectives, and Declan had made some ridiculous observation about the artist clearly painting while standing on his head. The comment was absurd, deliberately silly, and before Elena could stop herself, a sound burst from her throat. Laughter, high and startled and utterly uncontrolled. She clapped a hand over her mouth immediately, eyes wide with shock. Her whole body went rigid, waiting for the reprimand, the punishment, the shame. But Declan had frozen too, staring at her with an expression of pure wonder. Did you just laugh? Elena nodded, her hands still covering her mouth, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Do it again. I can't. I don't know how I did it the first time. Then I'll have to be funnier. And he had been trying deliberately terrible jokes, making increasingly absurd observations about the paintings around them, until she laughed again, then again. The sound felt foreign in her throat, like a language she'd once known as a child and forgotten. Her stomach hurt. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were different tears. Happy tears. Free tears. Declan had watched her with something in his eyes that made Elena's heart race in a way that had nothing to do with laughter. Something warm and intense and utterly terrifying. You should do that more often, he said softly when she'd finally caught her breath. I don't know how. Then we'll figure it out together. The casualness of that "we" lodged in Elena's chest like a stone, heavy and precious. Late October brought the first real cold, and with it a shift in their dynamic. They had begun meeting outside the museum, ostensibly to discuss cultural differences for Elena's research. Coffee at a small cafe near the Institute, where Declan taught her about American coffee culture, and she tried to explain why we Valdorians considered such indulgence frivolous. Walks through the Boston Public Garden, where the trees were ablaze with autumn color that would never have been permitted in Valdorian public spaces, too vibrant, too emotional. Conversations that stretched long past their supposed purpose, meandering into territory that had nothing to do with cultural exchange and everything to do with two people learning each other. Declan asked about Valdoria, and Elena found herself describing it not through the official narrative, but through memory. The harsh beauty of winter, when everything was ice and silence. The satisfaction of perfect discipline, of knowing exactly what was expected. The fear that lurked beneath the surface, the knowledge that any deviation would be noticed, recorded, punished. Do you miss it? Declan asked one evening as they walked along the Charles River, fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost obscene in their intensity. I miss, Elena paused, trying to articulate something she'd never examined. I miss the simplicity of knowing exactly what was expected, of never having to question whether I was doing the right thing. Every choice was already made. I just had to follow the path laid out. And now everything is a question, every interaction, every feeling. I don't know what's allowed anymore. I don't know what I'm allowed to be on. They stopped at a bench overlooking the water. The river reflected the sunset, doubling the impossible colors. Elena stared at it, this beauty that shouldn't exist according to everything she'd been taught. Can I tell you something? Declan turned toward her, his expression serious in a way that made her pulse quicken. That first day when I made you cry, I went home and couldn't stop thinking about you. Not just because you were beautiful, though you are, but because I saw something in you, Elena. Something fighting to get out. Something real and raw and extraordinary. Elena's breath caught. That's what frightens me. Why? Because I don't know who I am without the rules, without the control. What if the real me is just chaos? What if everything I was taught was right, and this, she gestured vaguely at herself, at him, at the space between them, is contamination? Then we'll figure it out together. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. His fingers brushed hers, a question. You don't have to navigate this alone. Elena's hand turned palm up, accepting. His skin was warm against hers at the touch, sending electricity up her arm and into her chest where her heart hammered against her ribs. They sat like that as the sun set, hands loosely joined, neither speaking, both terrified and unwilling to let go. When the sky had darkened to deep purple and the street lights began to flicker on, Elena finally spoke. In Valdoria, touching like this would be inappropriate, suggestive, a precursor to arranged partnership. And here, Declan's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gentle back-and-forth motion that felt more intimate than anything Elena had ever experienced. Here I don't know what it means, but I don't want to stop. Then don't. They walked back to the Institute hand in hand, and Elena felt like she was betraying everything she'd ever been taught. And yet she had never felt more certain that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. November 1st brought news that shattered their fragile world. Elena was called to Dr. Garrison's office, arriving to find the older woman behind her desk, expression carefully neutral in a way that immediately set off alarms. Miss Soren, please sit. I wanted to inform you personally before the official announcement. Dr. Garrison folded her hands on the desk. Ambassador Gregor Petrov will be arriving from Valdoria next week. He's requested accommodations at the Institute. The name hit Elena like ice water. Her whole body went cold. Ambassador Petrov is coming here. Yes, apparently there's interest in expanding the cultural exchange program. He'll be evaluating the success of your placement. Dr. Garrison's eyes were kind, but concerned. I take it you know him. Know him. Such a simple phrase for such a complicated truth. He was my instructor. Elena managed her voice steady through sheer force of will. After my father died, he oversaw my education. The scar on her jawline seemed to burn. Elena kept her hands perfectly still in her lap, refusing to give in to the urge to touch it to confirm it was still there. I see. Dr. Garrison's tone suggested she understood more than Elena had said. Is there anything I should know? Anything that might affect your work here? Elena wanted to say yes. Wanted to explain that Gregor Petrov was the embodiment of everything Valdoria stood for, everything she had been running from without admitting it. That he had been the one to hold the stylus when they burned the grief out of her. That his arrival meant judgment, assessment, and almost certainly punishment for what she had become. But she was Valdorian. She had been trained to protect state interests above personal concerns. No, Dr. Garrison, everything is fine. I look forward to his visit. The lie tasted like ash. She didn't go to meet Declan that evening as they'd planned. Couldn't face him. Couldn't bear to see the concern in his eyes when she would have to lie about what was wrong, or worse, tell the truth and watch him understand how impossible this situation really was. But Declan found her anyway. She was in the library staring at an open book without seeing the words when he slid into the chair across from her. You didn't come. I apologize. I was busy. Elena, his voice was gentle but firm. What happened? She wanted to lie, wanted to protect him from the complications of her world, but they had built something on honesty, on seeing each other truly, and she couldn't betray that now. Couldn't add that to the list of things she was already betraying. "Someone is coming," she said quietly, still not looking at him. "From Valdoria, someone who knew me before, who will know immediately that I've changed." Is that a bad thing? In Valdoria, she finally met his eyes. Yes, change is failure. Adaptation is contamination. Deviation from the acceptable path is weakness that must be corrected. Contamination. Declan said the word like it tasted bitter. "That's what they'd call this, what's happening between us." Elena nodded slowly. "And what would you call it?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena knew the answer, had known it for weeks, but hadn't dared to name it, hadn't dared to make it real with words. "Freedom," she whispered. "I would call it freedom." Declan's hand crossed the table, finding hers. "Then don't let them take it from you." But Elena knew it wasn't that simple. Grigor Petrov was coming, and when he arrived, he would bring to Valdoria with him all its rules and expectations and punishments. All the reasons she had learned to bury her true self so deep, she'd almost forgotten it existed. The freedom she had found in Declan's eyes in Thursday afternoons and stolen laughter and hands held in the twilight was about to face its greatest test. And Elena wasn't sure she was strong enough to fight for it, not when fighting meant losing everything else. The days before Petrov's arrival were torture. Elena pulled back from Declan, not entirely, but enough to create plausible distance. No more evening walks, no more coffee dates. Only the museum on Thursdays, and even then she kept their conversations professional, surface level, safe. Declan accepted it without complaint, though she could see the questions in his eyes, the concern he was too kind to voice. He gave her space while making it clear he was there waiting whenever she was ready. It made it harder somehow. His patience, his understanding, the way he loved her without demanding anything in return, because it was love. Elena understood that now. What she felt for him, what he felt for her. They hadn't said the words, but words were unnecessary. It was there in every glance, every careful touch, every silence that felt full rather than empty, and it was going to destroy everything. Elena spent her nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to prepare herself for what was coming, trying to rebuild the walls Declan had so carefully dismantled, trying to remember who she was supposed to be. But when she looked in the mirror, the woman staring back was someone new, someone who had laughed, someone who had cried freely, someone who had fallen in love despite every rule forbidding it, someone Grigor Petrov would recognize as a failure. The blank journal sat on her desk, still empty, mocking her with its unfilled potential. Her mother had given it to her with simple words, "For your thoughts, wherever they take you." Elena picked it up now, opened it to the first page, and wrote a single sentence: "I am afraid of who I'm becoming and afraid of who I'll be forced to stop being." She closed it quickly, as if the words might escape and condemn her. Outside her window, Boston continued its transformation into autumn. The trees blazed with colors Valdoria would never permit. Students walked hand in hand across the courtyard, laughing, touching, being carelessly, recklessly human. And Elena sat in her room, caught between two worlds belonging to neither, and waited for judgment to arrive. Ambassador Grigor Petrov arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early November, when the trees had shed most of their leaves and the wind carried the first promise of winter. Elena watched from her window as the black car pulled up to the Institute's entrance. She recognized him immediately, even from 3 stories up. The rigid posture, the measured steps, the way he moved through the world as if it owed him deference, as if his presence alone demanded submission. He was 53 years old and looked exactly as he had when Elena was 7. Time had not softened him. If anything, the years had carved his features into something harder, more uncompromising. His face was all sharp angles and cold assessment eyes that saw everything and forgave nothing. The Garda garrison greeted him at the entrance, her smile professional, her posture diplomatic. Elena couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw the ambassador's gaze sweep across the building's facade, assessing, cataloging, judging. This was not a man who came to appreciate, he came to correct. Her phone buzzed. A text from Declan. "Are you okay?" She typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on "He's here." The reply came immediately. "I'm in the museum. Come when you're ready." or don't, whatever you need. Elena stared at the message at the simple offer of presence without demand and felt something crack in her chest. In Valdoria, relationships were transactional, strategic. Love was a matter of genetic compatibility and social advancement arranged by families and approved by the state for optimal offspring and political benefit. But Declan offered something else, something she had no framework to understand. Choice without coercion, love without transaction, presence without obligation. She pulled on her coat and left the room before she could reconsider. The museum was empty except for Declan, who stood before a painting she'd never noticed before. It showed a door half-open, light streaming through the gap into darkness. Threshold, he said without turning, somehow knowing she was there. That's what the artist called it, the space between one world and another. Elena stood beside him close enough that their shoulders almost touched, seeking comfort in his nearness even as she maintained the careful distance Petrov's presence demanded. Which world is which? That's the question, isn't it? Is the light the world you're leaving or the one you're entering? He glanced at her, his eyes searching her face. What did he say? I haven't spoken to him yet. Dr. Garrison is conducting the official welcome. I'll be summoned tonight. The word tasted bitter. Summoned like a servant, like a child called before the headmaster. You're not a servant, Elena. In Valdoria, we are all servants to the state, to the collective good. Individual desire is irrelevant. As she heard herself reciting doctrine, falling back into old patterns like water finding familiar grooves. That's not living, that's existing. Perhaps for you there's a difference. The words came out sharper than she intended, fear manifesting as anger. But I've never known anything else, until... She stopped. Declan waited, patient as always, giving her space to find the words. Until you... She finished quietly. He turned to face her fully. The museum's soft lighting cast shadows across his features, making his eyes darker, more intense. Then let me show you one. Let me show you everything you've been missing. And when he sends me home, when this ends, Elena's voice cracked slightly. When I'm back in Valdoria, being re-educated into the person I was supposed to remain, then we'll have had something real, something true. Isn't that better than nothing? Elena wanted to say no. Wanted to argue that nothing would be safer, easier, less painful when the inevitable separation came. That never feeling was better than feeling and losing. That the Valdorian way, for all its harshness, at least protected you from this kind of hurt. But she had stopped being able to lie to him weeks ago. Yes, she whispered. It's better. Declan's hand found hers warm and solid, and they stood before the threshold painting in silence, both knowing they were standing on one themselves. Between before and after. Between who Elena had been and who she was becoming. Between safety and risk. Between death and life. The summons came at 7 that evening, a formal note delivered to her door by an institute staff member requesting her presence in the ambassador's temporary office at her earliest convenience. Not asking. Requesting. In Valdoria, there was no difference. Elena changed into formal Valdorian dress, gray and high-necked, every button precisely fastened. She pulled her hair back severely, applied minimal makeup, checked her reflection until the woman staring back looked appropriately disciplined, appropriately empty. The walk to the office felt like walking to execution. Grigor Petrov sat behind Dr. Garrison's borrowed desk as if it had always been his. The room felt smaller with him in it, the air heavier, harder to breathe. He had that effect, Elena remembered. Made spaces contract around his presence, made people smaller, made everything submit to his gravity. Miss Soren, sit. Elena sat back straight, hands folded in her lap. The posture was automatic, drilled into her from childhood. Perfect Valdorian composure. She had practiced it 10,000 times until it became who she was. Petrov studied her in silence, his gaze moving across her face like a physical touch, searching for cracks, for evidence of contamination. His eyes were pale gray, the color of winter ice, and just as warm. Your reports have been thorough, he said finally, each word precisely articulated. Detailed observations of American excess, emotional indiscipline, cultural weakness. You've documented their failures admirably. Thank you, Ambassador. However, he leaned forward slightly, a predator scenting prey. I have also received informal reports from others in the Valdorian community here in Boston. They speak of changes in your behavior, associations with Americans, time spent away from your assigned duties, laughter in public spaces. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained still. Years of training held. I have been conducting research, Ambassador. Understanding the culture requires a degree of immersion. Immersion. Petrov's lips thinned into something that wasn't quite a smile. Is that what you call it? I have been told you were seen laughing in public, displaying emotion, failing to maintain appropriate distance from your subjects, specifically a museum coordinator. A man, alone, for extended periods. So he knew. Of course he knew. Someone in the Valdorian community had been watching, reporting, doing their patriotic duty. Cultural exchange requires relationship building. It requires observation, Miss Soren, not participation. He stood, moving to the window, his back to her. The gesture was calculated, designed to make her feel dismissed, insignificant. Your father was a good man, disciplined, strong. He understood what Valdoria needed to survive in a world that mistakes weakness for virtue. He served the state without question. The mention of her father was deliberate, a reminder of what she owed, of what she had already cost. I honor my father's memory through my service, Elena said carefully, each word chosen for safety. Do you? Petrov turned and his eyes found the scar on her jawline with laser precision. Then perhaps you can explain why I've been informed that you spend every Thursday with this museum coordinator. Several hours, alone, conversing about matters that have nothing to do with your assigned research. The trap had been sprung. Elena's mind raced, searching for an explanation that wouldn't condemn her further, that would satisfy without revealing the truth of what Declan meant to her. Mr. Hayes is an expert on cultural artifacts. I have been learning about American art, which provides insight into their emotional psychology. You have been forgetting. Petrov's voice dropped to something quiet and deadly. Forgetting who you are, what you represent. I had hoped your rehabilitation after your father's funeral had been successful. Clearly, I was mistaken. Elena's hand clenched in her lap, fighting the urge to touch the scar. He wanted her to touch it, wanted the acknowledgement of his power, the recognition of what he could do, what he had done, what he would do again, if necessary. She kept her hands perfectly still. Ambassador, I have not failed in my duties. Your duty is to be an example of Valdorian strength. Instead, you have become exactly what we feared when we sent you here. Contaminated by American sentimentality, weakened by exposure to their emotional excess, you have allowed yourself to become soft. He returned to the desk, sat steepled, his fingers. I will be observing you closely for the remainder of my stay. Any further evidence of inappropriate behavior will result in immediate recall to Valdoria for recalibration. Do you understand recalibration? The gentle word for what Elena had endured at 7. What she knew was far worse for adults, a process that took months and left people hollow, emptied of everything that made them individuals. Yes, Ambassador. You may go. Elena stood, her legs somehow steady despite the trembling in her core. She reached the door before Petrov spoke again. Elena. She turned. He had never used her first name before, never acknowledged her as anything beyond her function. Your father would be ashamed of what you are becoming. The words hit exactly as intended, precisely where they would do the most damage. Elena left without responding, her composure held together by sheer will until she reached her room. Only then did she allow herself to lean against the door, eyes closed, breath coming in short gasps that wanted to become sobs. Your father would be ashamed. The terrible thing was that Petrov might be right. November deepened into cold and early darkness, and Elena pulled away from everything that had made the last 2 months bearable. She stopped going to the museum on Thursdays, stopped answering Declan's texts with anything more than brief formal responses, stopped allowing herself to feel anything beyond the careful neutrality she had been trained to maintain. Petrov was everywhere, observing lectures, attending cultural events, appearing unexpectedly in hallways, in the library, in the dining hall. Always watching, always assessing. His presence was a constant weight, a reminder of who she was supposed to be. Elena performed perfectly. She was the model Valdorian representative, cool and composed and completely empty. She wrote reports praising her own discipline, documenting how she had identified and corrected inappropriate emotional responses. She participated in exchange activities with professional detachment, never laughing, never showing warmth, never being human. At night alone, she pressed Declan's handkerchief to her face and remembered what it felt like to be seen, to be real, to be alive. She was dying by inches, and she knew it, and she didn't know how to stop. Dr. Garrison found her in the Institute library one gray afternoon, surrounded by books. She wasn't reading, staring at nothing. "May I sit?" Elena gestured to the chair across from her. The older woman settled with a quiet sigh, studying Elena's face with those two perceptive eyes. "I've been doing this job for 30 years, Dr. Garrison said without preamble. I've seen a lot of young people caught between worlds, between who they were raised to be and who they're becoming, between obligation and desire, between safety and risk. I'm not caught between anything," Elena said flatly, the lie automatic. "I'm simply remembering my purpose, fulfilling my mission." "Are you?" Dr. Garrison's gaze was kind, but unflinching. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're disappearing. Week by week, a little more of you vanishes. Soon there won't be anything left but the shell." Elena's fingers tightened on her pen. "With respect, Dr. Garrison, you don't understand Valdorian culture. This is who I'm supposed to be, who I've always been meant to be. I understand people, Elena, and I understand what it looks like when someone is trying to erase themselves to please someone else." She paused, letting the words settle. "During the Cold War, I worked with defectors, people who had left everything behind to choose freedom. Soviet dissidents, East Germans, North Koreans. Do you know what the hardest part was for them?" Elena shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Not the leaving, not the boss-on, not even the guilt of abandoning family and homeland. It was allowing themselves to believe they deserved what they were choosing. That freedom wasn't something to be earned through suffering, but something they were born with. That they had the right to be happy, to feel, to exist as full human beings rather than cogs in a machine. Freedom is a Western concept. In Valdoria, freedom is a human concept, and you, Elena Soren, are human, despite what you've been taught, despite what's been done to you." Dr. Garrison's voice gentled. "Declan asks about you every day. I tell him you're fine, but we both know I'm lying. Whatever you decide, whatever you choose, make sure it's actually your choice. Not fear wearing the mask of duty, not trauma disguised as discipline." She stood, placed a hand briefly on Elena's shoulder, a touch that would have been inappropriate in Valdoria, that was comfort here, and left. Elena sat in the silence, surrounded by books about American culture that suddenly felt like mirrors reflecting everything she was afraid to become, everything she was afraid to stop being. Thanksgiving approached, and with it an invitation Elena didn't expect. Declan found her in the courtyard one afternoon, wrapped in her coat against the November cold, watching other students pack for the holiday weekend. She had been avoiding him for 2 weeks, and the sight of him now, tired, worried, but still somehow glad to see her, made her chest ache. "Hey," she turned, and the words stuck in her throat. Just, "hey," so casual, so American, so perfectly him. "Hello. I wanted to—" He stopped, started, again running a hand through his hair in a gesture she recognized as nervousness. "Garrison is hosting a Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow night for international students who don't have family here. She asked me to invite you. Specifically asked me because she thought I might have better luck than a formal invitation." "That's kind, but I don't celebrate American holidays." "Elena." Her name in his mouth was a prayer and a plea. "I know you're pulling away. I know Petrov's presence makes everything complicated. I know this is hard, but it's one dinner, one evening. A few hours where you can just be you, whoever that is right now, without judgment or assessment or reports, please." She should say no, should maintain the distance. She'd been building the walls, she'd been reconstructing, brick by careful brick. Should protect them both from making this harder than it already was. But Declan's eyes held something she couldn't resist. Not quite hope, more like stubborn refusal to give up. Like he saw through all her careful reconstruction to the person underneath who was slowly suffocating. "Just dinner," she heard herself say, the words bypassing every rational thought. His smile was like sun breaking through clouds, brilliant and warming and impossible to look away from. Just dinner, I promise. Mr. Garrison's home was everything Elena's childhood home was not. Warm, cluttered with books and photographs, filled with the smell of roasting turkey, cinnamon bread rising, filled with life. There were 8 of them around the table. The other international students Elena recognized from orientations, Yuki from Japan, Marco from Brazil, Thandiwe from South Africa, Raja from India, Liu from China, Amira from Egypt. All far from home, all navigating the strange waters of American culture, all displaying the kind of open emotion that would be punished in Valdoria. Declan sat across from Elena, and their eyes met over the candles Dr. Garrison had lit, over the abundance of food that seemed excessive by Valdorian standards, over the warmth and laughter of people who had chosen to create family from strangers. The conversation flowed around them, stories of home traditions, comparisons of holidays, laughter over cultural misunderstandings. Dr. Garrison moved among them like a conductor, ensuring everyone was included, drawing out the quiet ones, tempering the loud ones, creating harmony from diverse voices. In Valdoria, Elena found herself saying, when Dr. Garrison asked about her homeland's traditions, "We don't have holidays like this. Celebration is considered frivolous. We mark historical dates with solemn remembrance, not feasting. Unity is expressed through collective discipline, not individual expression." "That sounds lonely," Amira said softly, her dark eyes compassionate. Elena had never considered it that way. Loneliness implied missing something. You couldn't miss what you'd never known, what you'd been taught to reject as weakness. "It's disciplined," she said carefully. "Discipline and loneliness aren't mutually exclusive," Dr. Garrison observed, serving cranberry sauce onto Elena's plate. "Sometimes they're the same thing wearing different names. Sometimes we call isolation discipline to make it bearable." The words lodged somewhere behind Elena's ribs, uncomfortable and true. After dinner, while others gathered in the living room for coffee and pumpkin pie, Elena stepped onto the back porch, needing air, needing space from the overwhelming warmth inside. The night was clear and cold, stars visible despite the city lights. Declan followed. "You didn't have to come out here," Elena said, not turning to look at him. "I know." He leaned against the railing beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cold air. "But I wanted to." The yard was dark, the neighbors' houses glowing with their own Thanksgiving gatherings. Elena stared up at the stars, these same stars that hung over Valdoria, over every place she'd ever been, and every place she'd never see. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for inviting me, for not giving up when I pushed you away. I couldn't give up on you, Elena. I don't think I'm capable of it." She turned to face him, and the porch light cast his features in golden shadow, making him look like something from a painting, beautiful and unreal. "You should be. This can't end well. You know that. Petrov is watching everything I do, documenting everything, building a case for my recall, and when that happens, we'll deal with it. But right now, in this moment, we're here, together, and that matters." "Does it? When the ending is inevitable, especially then." Declan reached out slowly, giving her time to step back to refuse. When she didn't, his hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with a gentleness that made her eyes sting with unshed tears. "I'm falling in love with you, Elena. I know I shouldn't. I know it's complicated and probably stupid and definitely hopeless. But I am, and I needed you to know, before whatever happens next. I needed you to know that someone sees you, really sees you, and loves what he sees." Elena's breath caught. In Valdoria, love was never spoken aloud. It was implied through arrangement, through duty, through the careful negotiation of genetic compatibility and social standing. Love as a feeling, as a choice, as something declared freely without expectation of reciprocation was foreign and terrifying and utterly impossibly beautiful. "I don't know how to love someone," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was never taught. I don't have the framework. I don't know what it means or how to do it or if I'm even capable. Then we'll learn together. We'll make mistakes and figure it out and probably do everything wrong. But we'll do it together." He leaned in, and Elena knew she should stop this, should step back, should protect them both from the inevitable pain, should preserve some shred of the discipline she'd been raised with. Instead, she rose on her toes and closed the distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like neither of them quite believed it was happening. Elena had never kissed anyone before, had never wanted to. Physical affection in Valdoria was clinical, transactional, divorced from emotion. But this was different. This was connection. This was choosing vulnerability, choosing risk, choosing to feel everything she'd been taught to suppress. Then Declan's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and Elena's hands found his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palms, and everything gentle transformed into something desperate and necessary and real. She had never been kissed before, had never wanted to be, but this was revelation. This was coming home to a place she'd never been. This was her heart recognizing something it had been searching for without knowing the search existed. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Declan pressed his forehead to hers, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. "Worth it," he whispered. "Whatever happens, whatever comes next, this moment was worth everything." Elena couldn't speak, could only nod, could only hold on to him and try to memorize this moment, this feeling, this impossible gift of being loved for who she actually was, rather than who she was supposed to be, for when it was taken away. Because it would be taken away. She knew that with absolute certainty. But for now, just for now, she let herself have this. Let herself have him. Let herself be human. The cultural gala was scheduled for the first Saturday in December, a showcase of the Institute's international programs. Elena spent the week helping prepare Valdorian artifacts for display, conscious always of Petrov's watchful presence, his silent assessment of every movement, every word, every interaction. She and Declan had been careful since Thanksgiving, painfully careful. No public displays, no long conversations where others might observe. No touches, however casual. They stole moments in empty hallways when they could, brief exchanges that said everything they couldn't speak aloud. Text messages that were coded innocent on the surface, layered with meaning underneath. It was torture. It was necessity. It was borrowed time, and they both knew it. The day of the gala, Elena arrived at the Institute early to ensure the Valdorian exhibition was perfect. Historical documents carefully preserved behind glass. Traditional crafts demonstrating Valdorian efficiency and precision. Photographs of her homeland's austere beauty, gray stone buildings, disciplined crowds, landscapes, stripped of unnecessary ornament. Everything arranged to project strength, discipline, national pride. Everything designed to show that Valdoria had no need for American excess. Everything a lie. She was adjusting the lighting on a display case when Declan found her appearing in the doorway of the exhibition room, like a vision from a life she couldn't quite have. "You look beautiful," he said softly, glancing around to ensure they were alone. Elena looked down at her formal dress, deep gray, high-necked, completely appropriate for a Valdorian representative. "I look like what I am, what I'm supposed to be." "You look like you. That's all I meant." He stepped closer but didn't touch her, maintaining the careful distance they'd agreed on. "That's what's beautiful. Not the dress or the formality. You, the person underneath all of it." Lena's throat tightened. "Declan, after tonight." "Don't." He moved closer just a fraction. "Let's just get through tonight. We'll figure out tomorrow when it comes." But tomorrow was already here, arriving early in the form of maintenance workers rushing through the corridor, radios crackling urgently. "Everyone needs to evacuate immediately," one of them called, voice tight with controlled panic. "Gas leak in the basement. Major rupture in the main line. Could be an explosion if it reaches the electrical room. Move quickly, but don't run." Chaos erupted instantaneously. Guests who had started to arrive streaming toward exits. Staff members trying to maintain order while clearly fighting their own fear. Alarms beginning to blare, harsh and insistent. Elena's first thought was the artifacts. Centuries of Valdorian history, irreplaceable, her responsibility. If they were destroyed, if she failed even in this basic duty, Petrov would have all the evidence he needed of her complete unworthiness. She ran toward the exhibition room as others ran away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Elena!" Declan's voice behind her, sharp with alarm, but she didn't stop. The display cases were closed, locked. She fumbled with her keys, hands shaking as the alarm screamed overhead. She had to secure them. Had to save something of her country, prove she hadn't completely failed, show that she could still fulfill her most basic obligations. Elena, we have to go. Declan grabbed her arm, trying to pull her toward the exit. The artifacts, my country's history, if they're destroyed, I failed my mission. I failed everything. Petrov will use this as proof that I'm unfit. The building shuddered violently. Somewhere below, something exploded, a deep boom that shook the foundations. The floor buckled beneath their feet. Ceiling tiles began to crack, dust raining down. Declan pulled her close, his body curving over hers protectively as they stumbled backward into a storage room. He kicked the door shut just as a section of ceiling collapsed where they'd been standing, debris crashing down with devastating force. Darkness, dust thick in the air. The distant sound of more alarms, more destruction. Declan's arms were around her, his body curved over hers, shielding her from falling fragments. Elena could feel his heart pounding against her back, could feel her own terror rising in her throat like bile. Are you hurt? His voice was rough, strained, muffled by the dust. No, I'm okay. He pulled back slightly, and in the dim emergency lighting that flickered through the cracks in the door, Elena could see his face. Pale, frightened, streaked with dust and sweat. Beautiful. The door's jammed, he said after pushing against it, his shoulders straining with effort. Something's blocking it from outside. We're trapped until the rescue crews can get to us. Elena's breath came faster, shorter. Trapped, in the dark, with danger all around, with the building potentially collapsing above them. Everything she'd been trained to handle with composure, with discipline, with a motionless assessment of the situation. But all she felt was fear, raw, overwhelming, unstoppable. I can't, her voice broke, cracked like the ceiling above them. I can't breathe, I can't. Hey, look at me. Declan's hands found her face, turning her toward him, forcing her to meet his eyes. Elena, look at me. She met his gaze, and something in his steady focus anchored her, pulled her back from the edge of panic. I've got you, he said, his voice firm despite his own fear. I'm right here, we're going to be okay. The rescue teams know where we are. They'll get us out. I've got you. You don't know that. Tears were streaming down her face now, cutting clean tracks through the dust, all the fear and pressure, an impossible situation finally breaking through. We could die here. The building could collapse. We could run out of air. We could. Elena. His thumbs wiped at her tears, gentle despite the chaos around them, despite the very real danger they faced. Do you know what I see when I look at you right now? She shook her head, unable to speak past the terror and grief and overwhelming emotion choking her. I see someone brave enough to run into danger for something they believe in. Someone strong enough to feel fear and keep going anyway. Someone real enough to cry when they're terrified instead of pretending to be made of stone. His voice dropped to a whisper. Right here. Right now. In this fear, in these tears, with dust in your hair and terror in your eyes, this is you, and you are beautiful. The words echoed that first afternoon in the museum when everything had changed. When he'd seen her for the first time, really seen her, and she'd cried for the first time in 19 years. Elena's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, needing his solidity, his warmth, his presence to keep her tethered to reality. I'm so afraid. I know. So am I. Of dying, of losing you. Declan's forehead pressed against hers, his breath warm on her face. Of not telling you every day that you're the most extraordinary person I've ever met. Of wasting a single moment of whatever time we have. Of not being brave enough to fight for this, for us, for the possibility that love might actually be stronger than duty or fear or whatever bullshit Valdoria uses to keep people in line. Elena kissed him then, desperate and fierce and completely uncontrolled. If they were going to die, let her die having felt this, having chosen this, having been fully, terribly, beautifully alive instead of merely existing. Declan kissed her back like she was oxygen, like she was everything, like the world could end and it wouldn't matter as long as he had this moment. His hands in her hair, her arms around his neck, both of them clinging to each other like drowning people to a life raft. They broke apart only when voices sounded in the corridor outside, when the sound of heavy equipment and urgent commands penetrated their isolation. In here, Declan shouted, moving toward the door. We're in here. The door was forced open with a screech of metal firefighters in full gear, pulling them out into a hallway filled with smoke and emergency lights. Elena stumbled, disoriented, and Declan caught her, held her as they were guided toward the exit through corridors she no longer recognized. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold, shocking after the dust-filled storage room. Ambulances lined the street, their lights painting everything in alternating red and blue. People wrapped in blankets sat on the curb being checked by paramedics. Someone put a blanket around Elena's shoulders, but she barely felt it. All she could feel was Declan's hand in hers, solid and real and alive. Until she looked up and saw Ambassador Gregor Petrov standing 30 feet away watching them. His face was stone, unreadable, but his eyes held something far worse than anger. Triumph. He had the evidence he needed. Elena, disheveled, tear-stained, clinging to an American man. All her careful distance, all her attempts to maintain propriety undone in one moment of crisis that had stripped away every pretense. She met his gaze across the chaos and saw her future in those cold eyes. Recall, recalibration, erasure of everything she'd become, the end of everything. The summons came at 7 the next morning, delivered to Elena's door before the sun had fully risen. She hadn't slept, hadn't even tried. She'd spent the night sitting at her desk, staring at the blank journal, trying to find words for what she was feeling, and coming up empty. Fear, grief, desperation, longing, love, all of it swirling together into something too big for language. She entered Petrov's office with her head high, ready for whatever came next. The ambassador sat behind his desk, a file folder open before him. Security camera images, stills from the night before, grainy but clear enough. Elena and Declan's kiss, visible in black and white, captured by cameras that had continued recording even as the building evacuated. Sit. She sat, her posture perfect, her face composed despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. I warned you, Petrov said, his voice eerily calm. I gave you the opportunity to correct your behavior. You chose instead to embrace contamination, to publicly display everything we have worked to eliminate from our culture. We were trapped, facing possible death. What you saw was human response to extreme circumstances. What I saw was a Valdorian representative completely losing control. He tapped the photos with one long finger, crying, kissing an American in full view of security systems, displaying every weak, undisciplined emotion we have spent generations learning to suppress. Fear, desire, need. He closed the folder, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the quiet office. You have failed, Miss Soren, completely and irrevocably. You were sent here to observe American weakness and report on their failures. Instead, you became their perfect example. You allowed yourself to be contaminated by their sentimentality, their emotional excess, their belief that feelings matter more than duty. Elena's hands clenched in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. I fulfilled my mission. My reports were thorough. I represented Valdoria. You represented everything Valdoria has worked to eliminate. Emotional excess, weakness, the kind of sentimental attachment that destroys discipline and order. Petrov leaned back, studying her with clinical detachment. I am invoking Protocol 17. You will return to Valdoria within 48 hours for recalibration. The process will take approximately 6 months. When it's complete, you will be reassigned to a position where your weakness cannot further damage our international reputation. 6 months. Elena knew what that meant. 6 months of systematic erasure, of every feeling, every memory, every piece of herself that had emerged in these 3 months, ground down to nothing. They would take Declan from her mind, take the laughter and the tears and the fear, leave her empty and compliant and obedient. Leave her dead in every way that mattered. 48 hours, she managed through a throat gone tight. To decide, to prepare for departure. The decision has been made. He studied her face, searching for submission, for acceptance. Unless you choose exile, in which case you will never see your mother again. Never return to your country. Never be anything but a failed Valdorian, forever contaminated by American weakness. Forever marked as a traitor to everything your father stood for. The threat to her mother was deliberate, calculated to make Elena fold, to choose temporary pain over permanent separation, to sacrifice herself to protect someone she loved. But something had shifted in Elena during those hours trapped in darkness with Declan. Something fundamental about what she was willing to accept, what she was willing to become, to satisfy people who had never valued her as anything but an object to be molded. 48 hours, she repeated. Not a question, a statement. Petrov's eyes narrowed. Choose wisely, Miss Soren. Exile is forever. There is no coming back from that choice. I understand. Elena stood her legs steady despite everything. May I be excused? He dismissed her with a wave, already turning back to his computer, to his reports, to his documentation of her failure. Elena walked out with her spine straight and her head high, and only when she reached her room did she let herself collapse against the door, sliding down to sit on the floor, her whole body shaking with the effort of holding herself together. 48 hours to decide between recalibration and exile, between losing herself or losing everything else, between survival and living. The choice felt impossible. December 16th, the first of her 2 days. Elena woke to find a note slipped under her door. Declan's handwriting, familiar now, each letter careful and deliberate. I know you're facing an impossible choice. I won't pretend to understand what you're going through or what's at stake. But I need you to know, whatever you decide, I'm here. If you choose to go back, I'll understand. If you choose to stay, I'll be waiting. If you need space to think, I'll give it. You don't owe me anything, Elena. You only owe yourself the truth. Whatever that truth is, I'll respect it. Love, Declan. So he'd written it there, simple and direct, the way Americans did everything. No complexity, no layers of meaning, just the raw truth. Elena pressed the note to her chest and let herself cry. That afternoon, she took the subway to Brighton, where Boston's small Valdorian community clustered in a neighborhood of quiet streets and buildings that echoed home in their austerity. She found the community center easily. Inside, a dozen Valdorians sat in rigid silence, reading newspapers, working on laptops, existing in the careful isolation they'd perfected. The air felt familiar, controlled, disciplined, empty of joy or connection. An older woman looked up as Elena entered, recognition flickering across weathered features. You're Soren's daughter, the cultural liaison everyone's talking about. Yes. Elena remained standing, uncertain of her welcome. Sit. The woman gestured to a chair. I'm Nadia Volkova. I've been in Boston 12 years. Your story reached us before you did. The liaison who cried in public, who fell in love with an American, who might actually have the courage to choose freedom. Elena sat, noting the perfect posture, the controlled expression, the absolute stillness that marked Valdorians everywhere. Why did you leave Valdoria? The question was forward, possibly rude, but Elena had 48 hours. She didn't have time for subtlety. Nadia's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of old pain carefully contained. My husband was transferred to the consulate. I came with him. When he died 5 years ago, I stayed. Why? Because returning would mean admitting I had changed, that America had contaminated me, that 12 years away from Valdorian surveillance had made me something other than perfectly disciplined. Nadia folded her hands precisely in her lap. And I had changed. I still have. I still maintain discipline, still practice control. But here I can choose when to be Valdorian and when to be something else. When to be human. Don't you miss home? Every day. The admission was startling in its honesty and its vulnerability. I miss my sister, miss the language spoken everywhere, not just in small enclaves. I miss knowing exactly what's expected, never having to navigate uncertainty, but I miss who I was becoming more. The version of myself that might have existed if I'd been born somewhere else, somewhere that allowed questions instead of only answers. Elena's breath caught. That was it, exactly the version of herself she'd glimpsed in Declan's eyes, in museum galleries, in laughter and tears, and moments of raw feeling. The person she might have been if she hadn't been systematically trained out of existence. I've been summoned home for recalibration, Elena said quietly. Nadia's gaze sharpened. And you're considering refusing. I don't know what I'm considering. I don't know how to think about this without the framework I was given. How do you weigh a country against yourself, a mother against freedom, everything you've ever known against the possibility of something different? Then think about this. Nadia leaned forward slightly, breaking her rigid posture for the first time. My daughter was born here, American citizen. She laughs without permission. She cries when she's sad. She falls in love, and makes mistakes, and feels everything intensely. And when I look at her, I see what I could have been. What all of us could have been if we'd been given permission to be human instead of efficient. But emotion isn't what makes us human. Discipline controls strength. Strength is choosing what to feel and when not feeling nothing at all. Nadia's voice was soft but firm. You think you're protecting yourself with silence, with control, with perfect Valdorian discipline. But really, you're just disappearing. Piece by piece, you're erasing yourself to fit a mold that was never designed for actual humans. The words echoed Dr. Garrison's different voice, but same truth. Elena stood, her hands trembling. Thank you for speaking with me. Miss Soren's and Nadia stood as well. There's a woman, Irina Kozlov. She lives alone 3 blocks from here. She left Valdoria 30 years ago. If you want to see what exile really looks like, what it costs, and what it gives, visit her. Building 47, apartment 3C. The address led Elena to a small apartment building, worn but clean, maintained with care despite obvious age. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, her heartbeat quickening with each step, and knocked on a door marked 3C. The woman who answered was perhaps 70, with white hair pulled back severely and eyes that were startlingly bright in a face lined with decades of living. Yes, Mrs. Kozlov. My name is Elena Soren. Nadia Volkova suggested I speak with you. The old woman's expression shifted, transformed by recognition and something that might have been hope. Soren, I knew your grandmother. Come in, child. The apartment was a sparse but not empty, functional furniture, clean surfaces. But on one wall hung photographs that would never exist in a Valdorian home, people smiling, touching, displaying open affection. A younger Irina standing beside a man in Valdorian military uniform. A child, perhaps 5, laughing at a birthday cake with candles. The same child, older, wearing an American school uniform. Family gatherings, graduations, weddings. A whole life captured in images that celebrated moments Valdoria would consider frivolous. Irina followed Elena's gaze. My daughter. Her name is Katya. Those are from her 5th birthday. The last one I spent in Valdoria. What happened? She turned 6. We had a small celebration, just family. But she cried when her father had to leave for deployment. Cried hard, inconsolably, the way children do when they don't understand why someone they love has to go. Irina's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed old pain. Someone reported us. A neighbor probably. Doing their patriotic duty. The school director said we were raising her improperly, allowing emotional weakness, failing to instill proper discipline. Elena knew what came next. Had lived a version of it herself. They wanted to take her for correction, for re-education. She was 6 years old and they wanted to burn the love out of her the way they burn it out of all of us. Irina moved to the window, staring out at the Boston street below. So I took her and left, in the night. Everything we could carry in 2 bags. Contacted the American embassy, requested asylum. We were granted refuge 3 days later. And your husband chose Valdoria, chose duty over his family. I received divorce papers 6 months later. The bitterness was carefully controlled, decades old, but still sharp. He died 10 years ago in a training accident. I learned about it from a newspaper. They never contacted me. Neither did his family. To them, I was erased, a traitor, a weakness that had contaminated their perfect soldier. Elena felt the weight of that isolation, that complete severance. Do you regret leaving? Irina turned, and for the first time she smiled. It transformed her face, made her look younger, softer, almost peaceful. I regret what I lost. I regret never seeing my parents again before they died. I regret my daughter growing up without knowing her grandparents, her culture, half of who she is. I regret the pain and the loneliness and the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I'd made the right choice. She moved to a photograph of a young family, clearly recent. A woman perhaps 40, a man, 2 children. But my daughter grew up free. She went to college, studied what she wanted, became a teacher because she loved learning, not because the state assigned her a career. Married for love. Has 2 children of her own who cry and laugh and feel everything without fear. Irina's voice softened. They know nothing of silence. They know nothing of hiding who they are. They know nothing of burning. And that Miss Soren is worth everything I sacrificed. But you're alone, Elena whispered, seeing the truth of isolation in this sparse apartment, this life built in the margins of exile. I have my daughter, my grandchildren, every Sunday. I have chosen family, other exiles, other people who understood what it cost to choose freedom. And I have myself unbroken by a system designed to erase individuality. Irina's gaze was direct, piercing. You have a choice to make. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you stand on the threshold. Someone told you to go back to submit to recalibration. Ambassador Petrov. Irina's expression hardened. Petrov. He was the one who tried to take my daughter. He's been enforcing conformity for 40 years, burning the humanity out of people and calling it patriotism. He won't stop until every Valdorian is exactly the same. Empty, controlled, obedient, dead in every way that matters. He says I've been contaminated, that I've failed my country. He's afraid of you, of what you represent, change, evolution. The possibility that Valdoria's way isn't the only way, isn't even the right way. Irina moved closer, her age-spotted hands steady. What did you feel in America that you never felt at home? Elena opened her mouth to deny feeling anything, to recite the careful doctrines she'd been taught. But Irina's eyes held such understanding, such hard-won wisdom, that the truth spilled out instead. Joy, when I left out for the first time in my life. Fear, real fear, when the building collapsed and I thought I might die. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Love, when someone looked at me and saw me. Not what I was supposed to be, not what I'd been trained to present, but the person underneath all the silence, all the control, all the perfect discipline. And you think returning to Valdoria will preserve that? That recalibration will leave you capable of feeling any of those things again? No, son. The admission was quiet, certain, final. It will erase me. Leave me an empty shell performing the motions of living without ever actually being alive. Then you have your answer, child. Elena looked at the photographs on the wall. Evidence of a life built on choice, rather than obligation on love, rather than duty on the courage to say no to a system that demanded everything and gave nothing back. I'm afraid, she whispered. Good. Irina's hand touched Elena's shoulder briefly, a rare gesture of affection from a woman who'd learned to be sparing with touch. Fear means you have something to lose, something worth protecting. That's more human than anything Valdoria ever taught you. Use that fear. Let it fuel your courage instead of feeding your doubt. Elena returned to the Institute as the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that would never appear in Valdorian public spaces, too vibrant, too emotional, too much like joy made visible. Dr. Garrison was waiting in her office, 2 cups of tea already poured. Come in, Elena. Sit. The ritual was familiar now, comforting in its simplicity. Elena sat, accepting the offered cup, grateful for something to hold, something to focus on besides the decision looming over her. I've spoken to Valdorians who left, Elena said without preamble, who chose exile over obedience. And they seem content, not happy exactly. Happiness feels too simple for what they have, but whole, like they've paid a terrible price but gotten something worth the cost. Our Dr. Garrison nodded slowly. During the Cold War, I worked with defectors, Soviet citizens, East Germans, North Koreans, people who risked everything, family identity, safety, to choose freedom. Do you know what the hardest part was for them? Elena shook her head, though she suspected she knew the answer. Not the leaving, not even the loss, though that was profound. It was allowing themselves to believe they deserved what they were choosing. That freedom wasn't something to be earned through suffering, but something they were born with. That they had the inherent right to be happy, to feel, to exist as full human beings, rather than components in a machine designed to serve the state. And my mother, Elena's voice broke slightly. If I choose exile, I'll never see her again. She'll be questioned about her failure to raise me properly, punished for my choice. She'll spend the rest of her life alone, marked by my betrayal. Exile is painful, it costs. The price is real and high. Dr. Garrison set down her cup, her eyes kind but unflinching. But what does recalibration cost? What's left of you after they're done erasing everything you've become? Can you live with being turned back into someone who can't laugh, can't cry, can't love? Can you survive being made into a perfect Valdorian when you've tasted what it means to be fully human? Elena's hands trembled around her cup. If I choose exile, I'm choosing myself over my mother, over my country, over everything I've ever known. Perhaps, or perhaps you're choosing to honor what your mother gave you by using it to live a full life. Perhaps you're choosing to be the kind of Valdorian that Valdoria should want, but is too afraid to allow. Perhaps your choice will make a difference for someone else's mother, someone else's daughter down the line. She paused, letting the words settle. Or perhaps none of that will happen. Perhaps you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what would have been if you'd been brave enough to choose yourself, if you'd valued your own humanity enough to fight for it. Dr. Garrison's voice gentled. I lost someone once, someone who chose duty over happiness because they thought that's what integrity looked like. They died regretting it, wishing they'd been brave enough to choose differently. I don't want that for you, Elena. Whatever you choose, make sure it's something you can live with, not just survive. Live. December 17th, the second day, her last day to decide. Elena spent the morning writing. Not reports, not documentation, not careful observations of American cultural failures. Just writing, pouring everything into the journal her mother had given her, filling page after page with truth. I am afraid of who I'm becoming and afraid of who I'll be forced to stop being. I am angry at a system that calls love contamination and joy weakness. I am grateful to a stranger who saw me when I couldn't see myself. I am terrified of losing my mother, but more terrified of losing myself. I am choosing. In the afternoon, Declan found her in the museum, standing before the mother and child painting where everything had begun. He didn't ask, didn't push, just stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and waited. I've made my decision, Elena said quietly. Okay. Don't you want to know what it is? Only if you want to tell me. Your choice belongs to you, Elena. Not to me, not to Valdoria, not to anyone else. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. She turned to face him. This man who had seen her really seen her and loved what he saw despite all the reasons he shouldn't. I'm not going back. Declan's breath caught. You're sure? No, I'm terrified. I'm choosing exile, choosing to never see my mother again, choosing to be marked as a traitor and a failure for the rest of my life. I'm choosing pain and loss and uncertainty. Her voice strengthened. But I'm also choosing to be able to feel that pain, to acknowledge that loss, to face that uncertainty as someone who's alive rather than just existing. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us. I'm choosing me. Elena, I need you to understand something. She took his hands, holding tight. I don't know how to do this. How to be in love, how to build a life outside the framework I was given, how to be anything but what I was trained to be. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to struggle. There will be days I regret this choice. I know. But I need to try. I need to know what it's like to live as myself, whoever that turns out to be, rather than dying slowly as the person Valdoria tried to make me. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. I'm choosing tears over silence, feeling over emptiness, life over mere survival. Declan pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried, as she grieved for what she was losing, even as she claimed what she was gaining. I'm so proud of you, he whispered into her hair. So incredibly proud. They stood there in the museum before the painting that had started everything, and Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly. The choice was too hard, the cost too high for peace. But certainty. The bone-deep knowledge that she was choosing rightly, even if the right choice hurt. December 18th, the hearing. Elena stood before the Valdorian Cultural Committee assembled in a conference room that Dr. Garrison had provided. 5 faces on a screen beamed in from Valdoria itself. Ambassador Petrov in person, seated at the head of the table, his expression already triumphant. She wore Valdorian formal dress. Gray, high-necked, perfectly appropriate. Her hair was pulled back severely. Her face was composed, controlled, showing nothing. She looked exactly like the girl who had arrived in September. But she wasn't that girl anymore. Petrov opened the proceedings with cold formality. Elena Soren, you have been summoned to answer for conduct unbecoming a Valdorian representative. Evidence has been presented of public emotional display, inappropriate relationships with foreign nationals, and general failure to maintain the standards of discipline required of your position. He gestured to the folder before him, thick with documentation. Photographic evidence of physical intimacy with an American citizen. Multiple reports of public laughter, crying, and other emotional excess. Documented abandonment of assigned duties in favor of personal pursuits. Willful contamination by American sentimentality and weakness. The words washed over Elena like water. Once they would have crushed her. Once the shame alone would have been enough to make her submit to accept recalibration, to erase herself to fit the mold. Not anymore. How do you respond to these charges? Petrov's voice was sharp, expecting submission or excuse. Elena stood. The room was silent except for the hum of the video connection. I will not return to Valdoria for recalibration. Shock rippled across the faces on the screen. Petrov's expression hardened into something ugly. You understand that this constitutes voluntary exile, that you will never be permitted to return to Valdorian soil, that your mother will be questioned extensively about her failure to instill proper values, that your name will be stricken from official records, that you will be marked as a traitor to everything our nation stands for. The threats were designed to break her, to make her reconsider, to trigger the obedience that had been drilled into her since birth. Instead, they gave her clarity, gave her rage, gave her the final push she needed to speak her truth. I understand, Ambassador, and my answer remains the same. I will not return. Petrov leaned forward, his face a mask of controlled fury. Then state your reasoning for the record. Let the committee understand the full extent of your failure. Let them hear your confession of weakness. Elena took a breath, felt it fill her lungs, felt her heart beating against her ribs, felt every cell in her body alive and present and terrified and certain. And she spoke. For 26 years, I believed what I was taught, that tears were weakness, that love was indulgence, that silence was strength, that showing emotion was failure, that needing connection was shameful, that the only worthy life was one lived in service to Valdorian ideals of discipline and control. Her voice was steady, growing stronger with each word, each truth claimed. I believed that my father would be ashamed of me for crying at his funeral. I believed that the punishment I received, the burning, the scarring, the systematic elimination of my ability to grieve was justified, necessary for my own good and the good of the state. She paused, letting the admission sink in. On the screen, one of the committee members, an elderly woman, leaned closer to her camera. I was 7 years old when my father died. 7 years old when I learned that loving someone enough to grieve them was wrong, that tears dishonored his memory, that my pain was shameful weakness that had to be corrected. Elena touched her jawline, the scar visible to everyone watching. You did this, Ambassador Petrov. You and others like you. You burned my skin to teach me not to feel. You made a child believe that her love for her father was contamination. You spent 19 years ensuring that lesson took root so deeply I couldn't imagine any other way to be. She looked directly at him, no longer afraid. 3 months ago, I came to America. I stood in a museum before a painting of a mother crying over her child, and a man, a stranger, asked me why I was staring. I told him I saw technical proficiency because that's all I'd been taught to see. That's all I was allowed to see. Her voice broke slightly, but she didn't stop. But what I really saw was everything I'd been taught to suppress. Everything I'd lost when you burned the grief out of me. Everything human that Valdoria systematically eliminates and calls it strength. Tears fell now, but Elena didn't wipe them away. Let the committee see. Let Petrov see. Let them witness what they tried so hard to destroy. That man told me I was beautiful. Not my appearance. Not my accomplishments. Not my perfect Valdorian discipline. He said I was beautiful because of what I was feeling. Because of the longing in my eyes for something I couldn't name but desperately needed. She stepped forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table. And I cried. For the first time in 19 years, I cried. Because someone saw me, the real me, not the perfect Valdorian representative, not the disciplined, controlled product of your re-education, but the person underneath all that silence, the girl who had loved her father and lost him and been punished for grieving. One of the committee members on the screen shifted, something like recognition crossing her features. In the months since I learned what it means to feel, Elena continued, her voice rising with passion, with certainty, with the truth she'd kept buried for so long. I laughed for the first time in my life. I was afraid, truly viscerally afraid, when the building collapsed. I fell in love. And yes, I cried, many times, because it turns out when you allow yourself to feel joy, you also feel pain. When you love, you risk loss. When you're human, you're vulnerable. She looked at each face on the screen, then back to Petrov. You say I've been contaminated by American weakness, that I've failed my country and dishonored my father's memory. But I've realized something in these 3 months. Elena's voice dropped, became quiet, but absolutely certain. The only dishonor would be returning to Valdoria and letting you erase the person I've become. The only failure would be choosing silence over truth, control over feeling, obedience over humanity. My father loved me. If he could see me now alive and feeling and real, he would be proud. Not ashamed, proud. Her hands were shaking. Her face was wet with tears. Her voice cracked on the final words. I am Valdorian. That's in my blood, my bones, my history. I can't change that, and I don't want to. I'm proud of where I come from, proud of my culture's strength and resilience and discipline. She straightened to her full height. But I choose to be a Valdorian who feels, who cries when she's sad, who laughs when she's joyful, who loves without permission, who lives fully instead of just existing in controlled silence. If that means exile, I accept it. If that means I never see my mother again, I'll carry that pain. If that means being marked as a traitor, I'll bear that mark. Elena's voice rose to fill the room. But I will not go back to being what you tried to make me. I will not let you burn the humanity out of me a second time. I will not trade my life for your approval. The silence that followed was absolute. On the screen, committee members exchanged glances. Petrov's face was stone fury, barely contained beneath the surface. Then the elderly woman who had leaned forward earlier spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear, carrying the weight of authority. I vote for asylum. Let her stay. Petrov's head snapped toward the screen. Katya, you don't have the authority to— I vote for asylum, Katya repeated stronger, now her aged face set with determination. I lost my daughter to this system 30 years ago. Irina Kozlov defected with my granddaughter rather than submit the child to re-education for the crime of crying. I haven't seen them since. Haven't held my daughter or met my great-grandchildren. Haven't been able to tell Irina that she made the right choice, that I'm proud of her courage. Her voice thickened with emotion Valdorians weren't supposed to feel, let alone display. I've spent 3 decades wondering if I should have been brave enough to go with them, to choose my family over the state, to value love over duty. I wasn't brave enough then. I lived with that cowardice every day. Katya's eyes found Elena through the screen, and they were wet with tears. I will not lose another young woman to our cruelty. I will not be complicit in breaking another person who has the courage I lacked. Times must change. We must change. And if it takes exile to protect this girl's humanity, to give her the life my daughter had to flee to claim, then I support exile with everything I have. Another committee member, younger perhaps 50, nodded slowly. I second the vote for asylum. Councillor Katya is right. We have made strength into cruelty. We have made discipline into oppression. Perhaps it's time we learn from those brave enough to say no. A third member, a woman in her 40s, agreed. Let her stay. Let her choose. And let her choice stand as testimony to what we're losing by demanding perfection over humanity. Petrov stood his chair, scraping harshly against the floor. This is unprecedented, unacceptable. The committee cannot override established protocols. The committee is split 3-3, Katya said calmly with the authority of age and position. Valdorian law requires unanimous consent for forced repatriation. Without it, Miss Soren may remain in America with no penalty beyond voluntary exile. She may not return to Valdoria unless our policies change, but she cannot be compelled to return for recalibration. She'll never see her family again, never walk Valdorian soil, never. Those will be the consequences of her choice, and they are heavy, real, painful. Katya's gaze remained on Elena, but they will be her choice to live with, her burden to carry, her life to build in whatever way she sees fit. The old woman's face softened, something like hope breaking through decades of practice to control. Live well, child. Live fully. Feel everything: joy and pain, love and loss, laughter and tears. For all of us who couldn't. For all of us who didn't have your courage. For all of us who are still learning that being human isn't weakness. The screen went dark. Petrov turned to Elena, his expression venomous. You've made a grave mistake. You'll regret this. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering what you've lost, who you might have become if you'd had the strength to endure recalibration and return home properly corrected. Perhaps, Elena said quietly, meeting his gaze without flinching. But it will be my regret, my choice, my life. And that's more than I ever had in Valdoria. She walked out of the conference room with her head high, tears still streaming down her face, and found Declan waiting in the hallway exactly where she knew he would be. He didn't ask, didn't need to. He just opened his arms, and Elena walked into them, letting herself be held as she cried. Not from sorrow, though there was sorrow in losing her mother, her country, everything familiar. Not from fear, though fear was there too, fear of the unknown future stretching ahead. She cried from freedom, from the profound relief of being able to choose herself, her own humanity, her own right to feel and love, and live without permission from anyone. From the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that she was finally, truly, courageously alive. The months that followed were harder than Elena expected and easier than she feared. Harder because exile was real. The loss of her mother was a constant ache, a phantom limb pain that never quite faded. Some mornings she woke reaching for Valdorian routines, Valdorian certainties, only to remember that those structures were gone, that she was adrift in a world of choices she didn't always know how to make. Easier because she wasn't alone. Declan was there, patient and steady and endlessly supportive. Dr. Garrison helped her navigate asylum paperwork, find a therapist who specialized in authoritarian trauma, connect with other exiles who understood the strange grief of choosing freedom. Elena got a job at the Institute, a permanent position teaching cultural awareness, specifically emotional intelligence across cultures, teaching others what she'd learned the hard way, that feelings weren't weakness, that vulnerability was strength, that being human meant embracing the full spectrum of experience, beautiful and terrible. She found community among the other international students, among American friends, who accepted her stumbling attempts at casual affection, among the small diaspora of Valdorian exiles who met monthly to speak their language and remember their homeland while building new lives. She learned to laugh without fear, to cry without shame, to love without holding back. And she had Declan. Every day, she chose him. Every day, he chose her. They learned each other slowly, carefully building something real and lasting from the fragments that first impossible afternoon in the museum. June 2025 arrived in Boston with warmth and green leaves and the kind of bright hope that comes after surviving a long winter. Elena stood in the Institute's museum in front of the painting where everything had begun. Mother and child. The woman's painted tears still flowing, still impossibly expressing something Elena now understood fully. Love, grief, the courage to feel both without reservation. 9 months had passed since the hearing. 9 months of learning to navigate life as an exum, as someone caught between two worlds, as a woman building an identity from scratch at 26. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. It was the best choice she'd ever made. There you are. Declan's voice came from behind her, familiar as her own heartbeat, now welcome as sunrise. Elena turned and her face did something it never would have 9 months ago. It smiled, genuinely, openly, without thought or control. I was remembering. The first day, every day, how far I've come, how much I've changed, how much further I have to go. Declan moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. They fit together now, two people who had learned each other's rhythms, each other's silences, each other's ways of being in the world. Dr. Garrison gave me something, he said, pulling a small envelope from his pocket. Asked me to give it to you. Said it came through one of her contacts. Elena's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a photograph she'd never seen before. Her mother smiling at the camera with an expression Elena had never witnessed on her face. Real joy, unguarded happiness. And on the back, in careful handwriting, my daughter. I always wanted you to be free. I'm proud of your courage. I understand your choice. I made the same one in my heart years ago, but didn't have your strength to claim it. Live well. Live fully. I love you. Always. Mama Elena's vision blurred. The photograph shook in her hands as tears fell, as her breath came in gasps that wanted to become sobs. How did she couldn't finish the question. Katya, Irina's mother, the counselor who voted for your asylum. She got it out through diplomatic channels. Dr. Garrison has contacts from her Cold War days. Declan's arm came around her shoulders, steady and warm. Your mother knows you're safe, and she's proud of you. She understands. The tears came harder, a storm of relief and grief and love, all tangled together. Elena held the photograph to her chest and cried, letting Declan hold her, no longer ashamed of her tears or her need or her profound, messy humanity. When the storm finally passed, she looked up at him through wet lashes. Thank you. For everything. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For waiting when I pulled away. For loving me even when I didn't know how to love you back. For being patient while I learned what it means to be human. Declan's thumb wiped tears from her cheeks, gentle as always. Speaking of loving you, he reached into his pocket again, pulled out a small box. Lena's breath stopped. I know we've only known each other 9 months, Declan said, opening the box to reveal a simple silver ring set with a small stone. I know you're still figuring out who you are without all the rules you were raised with. I know this is fast and probably crazy and definitely complicated. He looked at her with those blue-gray eyes that had first seen her when she couldn't see herself, that had witnessed every tear and every laugh and every step of her transformation. But I also know that every day I choose you. Every day I want to wake up and see your face. Every day I want to hear about what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're becoming. Every day I want to support you as you build the life you're claiming. His voice dropped to something soft and intimate and absolutely certain. So I'm asking, will you choose me every day for all the days we have? Will you marry me, Elena Soren, and let me spend my life learning what it means to love someone as brave and beautiful and real as you? Elena looked at the ring, simple and perfect, looked at Declan, patient and loving, and entirely hers if she chose. Looked at the future spreading before them, uncertain and terrifying and full of possibility. In Valdoria, she would have calculated, analyzed compatibility, considered genetic factors and social standing, and all the logical reasons marriages were arranged by families and approved by the state. But she wasn't in Valdoria anymore. She was here free to choose, free to love, free to build a life based on feeling rather than function. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at once, her face wet with tears and radiant with joy. Yes, I choose you every day, every moment, yes. He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her, like everything had been leading to this moment. Then he kissed her and the museum fell away, and there was only this moment, this choice, this love that she'd claimed despite everything trying to prevent it. When they finally pulled apart, both grinning like fools, Elena glanced back at the painting. Do you remember what you said that first day? That you were beautiful, that I look in homesick for something I'd never had. Elena turned to face him fully, one hand touching the ring on her finger, the other holding her mother's photograph. I'm not homesick anymore, because I'm home, here, with you, building a life that's mine. Declan's smile was radiant, full of love and pride and unwavering support. You know what the artist called this painting, the one we're standing in front of? Mother and child. No, that's what the museum called it when they acquired it. But the artist's original title was Threshold, the space between one world and another, the moment of transformation, the courage to step from what you know into what you might become. Elena looked at the painting with new eyes, saw not just tears but transition, not just grief but growth, not just loss but the strength to feel it all and keep moving forward. I like that better, she whispered. So do I. Declan pulled her close, pressed a kiss to her temple. Ready to go, Dr. Garrison's making dinner to celebrate our news. Wait, Elena pulled back slightly, took out her phone. There's something I need to do first. She opened her email, began to type. Words flowing freely, honestly from a heart that was finally learning how to be open. Dear Mama, I received your photograph, your message, your love. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for being proud. Thank you for giving me permission to choose what you couldn't. I want to tell you about the man I'm going to marry. His name is Declan Hayes. He sees me, really sees me the way Papa used to see you before the rules made you hide. He taught me that tears are not weakness, that love is not indulgence, that being human is not something to apologize for, but something to celebrate. I miss you every day. The ache of your absence never quite fades. I'm sorry we may never see each other again in this life. I'm sorry my choice caused you pain. But I'm not sorry for choosing to feel, to love, to live. Thank you for the blank journal. I filled it with my story, the one I'm choosing, the one I'm living, the one I'm claiming despite everything trying to stop me. Someday if things change, if Valdoria changes, I'll bring it home to you. We'll read it together. We'll cry together. We'll laugh together. Until then, know that I'm happy. Know that I'm free. Know that I'm honoring the love you couldn't show, but always felt. With all my love and gratitude, your daughter Elena. She sent it to Dr. Garrison to forward through whatever channels had brought her mother's photograph. Then she turned back to Declan, took his hand and smiled. Now I'm ready. They walked out of the museum hand in hand past the threshold painting, past the place where everything had changed into the golden June evening that smelled of roses and possibility. Epilogue. The wedding took place in July in the Institute's garden where summer roses bloomed against old brick walls. Small, intimate, just the people who had become Elena's chosen family. Dr. Garrison officiated, her voice steady and warm as she spoke about bridges between worlds, about courage that transcends borders, about love that sees truly and without condition. Marriage is its own threshold, she said, smiling at Elena and Declan. A choice to step from individual into shared, from separate into together, from what you were into, what you are becoming. These two young people know something about thresholds, about the courage it takes to step from one world into another. Elena wore white, a color forbidden in Valdorian weddings, where brides wore gray to symbolize duty, sacrifice, the sublimation of self into collective. But this wasn't a Valdorian wedding. This was hers, theirs. A celebration of choosing love over duty, feeling over emptiness, life over mere existence. Yuki stood as her maid of honor, the Japanese student who had been one of the first to befriend her, to show her that kindness didn't require guarded distance. Marco and Thandiwe sat in the front row, grinning and dabbing at tears without shame. Nadia Volkova was there, and Irina Kozlov with her daughter and grandchildren, 3 generations of Valdorian exiles, witnessing this moment, this victory, this proof that choosing freedom was worth the cost. When Declan slipped the second ring on her finger, when he said, "I do," with tears in his eyes and love written across every feature, Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not the empty silence of her childhood, not the controlled discipline of Valdorian composure, but a fullness that came from choosing joy despite knowing it could hurt. "I do," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the garden, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They kissed to applause and laughter and tears, and Elena thought her father would have loved this, would have loved seeing her happy, free, alive, would have been proud of the woman she'd become despite everything trying to prevent it. The months that followed were ordinary in the most extraordinary way. Elena learned to cook American food badly, at first burning more than she succeeded. Declan learned to pronounce Valdorian words, his accent atrocious, making her laugh every time he tried. They argued about small things, dishes, schedules, whose turn it was to take out the trash, and it was glorious. Normal, beautifully, mundanely human. Elena wrote in her journal every night now, not reports for Valdoria, but her own story, the one she was living, the one she was choosing. Pages and pages of truth, of feeling, of the daily miracles of being allowed to be fully herself. She kept her mother's photograph on her bedside table, and some mornings she woke to find Declan had left fresh flowers beside it. Small gestures of love for the woman he'd never met, the mother-in-law who existed only in photographs and rare precious messages smuggled through diplomatic channels. Work at the Institute continued. Elena's classes on emotional intelligence grew popular, drawing students from across campus who were hungry for permission to feel, for frameworks to understand emotion as strength rather than weakness. She became known as a demanding but compassionate teacher, someone who expected honesty and growth and genuine engagement with difficult truths. Sometimes late at night she wondered about Valdoria, about whether her choice had mattered, whether her defiance had changed anything, whether anyone back home even remembered her name. Then in March 2027, 15 months after the hearing, Dr. Garrison called her into the office. Elena entered to find the older woman behind her desk, expression carefully neutral in a way that immediately set off alarms. This was the same face Dr. Garrison had worn when announcing Petrov's arrival, when delivering news that changed everything. "Sit down, Elena." She sat, her heart-racing hands gripping the arms of the chair. "What's wrong? Is it my mother has something?" "Your mother is fine." Dr. Garrison's face softened. "Better than fine, actually. I have news that I wanted to deliver personally before the official announcement arrives." She slid a folder across the desk. Official letterhead, Valdorian diplomatic seal. Elena's hand shook as she opened it. Notification of approved emigration request. Applicant Marta Sorin. Status approved, expected arrival, April 2027. The words blurred. Elena read them again and unable to process what they meant. "Your mother submitted an emigration request 6 months ago," Dr. Garrison explained gently. "Apparently after your wedding, she saw the photos you sent. She began the application process. It was denied twice. But on the third attempt, with support from Councillor Katya in the reformist faction that's been gaining influence, it was approved." "She's coming here." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "To America, she's really coming. She'll be arriving next month. I've been working with the State Department to expedite her visa, arrange housing, all the necessary logistics." Dr. Garrison's smile, genuine warmth, breaking through her professional composure. "You'll see your mother again, Elena. You'll get to introduce her to Declan. You'll get to show her the life you've built." Elena couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the approval letter through a haze of tears. 2 years. 2 years of wondering if she'd made the right choice. 2 years of missing her mother with an ache that never quite faded. 2 years of letters smuggled through back channels, photographs passed through diplomatic contacts, love expressed through fragments and whispers. And now this impossible gift, this second chance. Does she? Elena's voice broke. Does she know about me, about who I've become? Will she? "Read this, Doctor." Garrison handed her another letter, this one handwritten on thin paper, the kind that could be easily smuggled. "My darling Elena, I am coming. At last I am coming. For 2 years I told myself I was angry with you for choosing exile, for leaving me, for breaking our family, for making me face the consequences of your choice. But the truth I couldn't admit even to myself is that I was jealous. Jealous that you had the courage I never found. Jealous that you chose freedom when I chose safety. Jealous that you're living the life I dreamed of as a girl before they taught me that dreams were weakness. I watched the videos you sent, saw you laughing at your wedding, saw you with your husband, saw you alive, truly radiantly alive in a way I've never been, in a way I was taught to believe was impossible. You didn't abandon me, Elena. You showed me there was another way. You proved that choosing yourself wasn't selfishness, but courage. You made me brave enough to finally ask the question, what if I chose too? So I'm choosing. I'm coming to you. I'm leaving Valdoria, the only home I've ever known, the place that holds your father's memory. Everything familiar, to join you in the unknown. I'm terrified. I'm too old for this, too set in my ways. I don't know how to be anything but Valdorian. But you're learning and I can learn too. I'll see you soon, my brave daughter. My beautiful girl who taught her mother what courage looks like. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I couldn't show it. Your mother Elena's tears fell on the paper, smudging the ink, but she didn't care. She read it again and again and again until the words were burned into her memory. Her mother understood. Her mother was proud. Her mother was choosing freedom, choosing Elena, choosing life over mere existence. Her mother was coming home. April 2027. Elena stood in the international arrivals terminal at Logan Airport. Declan's hand tight in hers, her whole body vibrating with anticipation and fear in equal measure. Around them, other families waited for loved ones. Reunions happening every few minutes, tears, laughter, embraces, joy, written across every face. Elena watched them and tried to remember how to breathe. She'll be here soon, Declan murmured, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. Any minute now. What if she's changed her mind? What if she got to the airport and couldn't go through with it? What if, look, He pointed and Elena's heart stopped. There, emerging from the customs area with a single suitcase moving slowly through the crowd of travelers was her mother, 2 years older, gray in her hair that hadn't been there before, lines around her eyes that spoke of worry and sleepless nights. But she was here, real, solid, her mother. They saw each other across the terminal. For a moment, neither moved. Two Valdorian women separated by years and choices, and an ocean of unsaid things connected by blood and love, and the courage to choose freedom over fear. Elena had imagined this moment 1,000 times, had planned what she would say, how she would behave, how she would maintain enough control to not overwhelm her mother with American emotional excess. All of that evaporated the moment their eyes met. Her mother opened her arms. Elena ran. Ran like the 7-year-old she'd once been, like the daughter who had been taught that needing her mother was weakness, like the woman who had finally learned that love was strength. They collided in the middle of the terminal, holding each other, crying openly, shamelessly, freely. Her mother's arms were around her, solid and real, and Elena buried her face in her shoulder and sobbed. "I'm proud of you," her mother whispered in Valdorian, the language they'd been forbidden to speak, with emotion now carrying more feeling than it had ever been designed for. "Your father would be proud too. So proud of our brave girl who chose life." "I missed you," Elena choked out. "I missed you so much." I know, I'm here now, I'm here." They held each other as people moved around them, as life continued, as the world turned. Held each other and cried and laughed and existed in that space where grief and joy meet, where loss and reunion become the same thing. Finally, when they could breathe again, when the tears slowed to something manageable, Lena pulled back enough to see her mother's face. "Mama, I want you to meet someone." She turned and Declan stepped forward. His own eyes wet, his expression gentle. "This is my husband, Declan Hayes." "Mrs. Soren." Declan extended his hand, then seemed to reconsider and opened his arms instead. "May I?" Elena's mother hesitated only a moment before stepping into the embrace, accepting this American gesture of affection, this physical display that would have been inappropriate in Valdoria but felt right here in this moment, in this new life they were all choosing. "Thank you," she said to Declan when they pulled apart, "for seeing her, for loving her, for giving her the courage to be herself." "I didn't give her anything," Declan said softly. "She had the courage all along. I just noticed it. The rest was all her." Elena stood between them, her mother and her husband, her past and her future, the two people who loved her most and felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. "Let's go home," she said, taking both their hands. They walked out of the airport together, three people connected by love and choice, and the shared understanding that freedom was worth whatever it cost. The years that followed were everything and nothing like Elena had imagined. Her mother struggled at first as Elena had struggled. The language was difficult, the cultural expectations confusing, the abundance of choice overwhelming for someone who had lived 54 years being told exactly what to think, what to feel, what to be. But she adapted, slowly, carefully, with Elena's support and Declan's patience and Dr. Garrison's guidance. She got a job at a local library where her love of order and precision made her an excellent cataloger. She made friends among the other Valdorian exiles, forming a small community of people learning to be human together. And she learned to laugh, to cry, to hug her daughter without hesitation, to tell Elena she loved her openly and often making up for decades of mandated silence. They spent Sundays together, the three of them, sometimes four, when Irina and her daughter joined them, cooking meals that were half Valdorian, half American, entirely theirs, sharing stories, building traditions, creating the family they'd all chosen rather than the ones they'd been assigned. Elena continued teaching her classes, growing more popular each year. She published papers on emotional recovery from authoritarian systems, on the process of learning to feel after decades of suppression, on the courage it took to choose authenticity over obedience. She became a voice for Valdorian reform, speaking at conferences, writing articles, connecting with the activists inside Valdoria who were pushing for change. Slowly and possibly slowly, things began to shift. The reformist faction Councillor Katya had mentioned grew stronger. Policies began to relax. Immigrants were allowed more contact with family. And in 2029, 4 years after Elena's defiance, Valdoria announced a pilot program. Citizens who wished to explore emotional wellness could apply for temporary exit visas to study in America, to learn what Elena and others like her had learned, to discover whether feeling might actually make them stronger rather than weaker. Elena cried when she read the news, cried with joy and relief in the profound satisfaction of knowing that her choice, her courage, her refusal to be erased had mattered, had changed something, had made a difference for daughters not yet born, for families not yet formed, for people not yet brave enough to choose themselves. June 2030, 5 years after that first afternoon in the museum, Elena stood before a new painting that the Institute had just acquired, studying it with the practiced eye she'd developed. Declan beside her, their hands linked automatically, their presence together as natural as breathing. The painting showed a door fully open now, light streaming through into what had been darkness. A figure stood on the threshold, 1 foot in shadow, one in light, face turned toward the brightness. They called it courage, Declan said softly. The artist painted it after visiting Ellis Island, thinking about all the people who had stood at America's threshold, choosing the unknown over the familiar, hope over certainty, freedom over safety. Elena studied the figure's posture, uncertain but determined, afraid but moving forward anyway. Saw herself in that painted form, saw her mother, saw everyone who had ever been brave enough to step from what they knew into what they might become. Do you ever regret it? Declan asked the question he'd never voiced before, but she'd always known was there. Choosing to stay, choosing exile. Elena turned to face him, this man who had seen her truly, who had loved her completely, who had stood beside her through every step of her transformation. I regret the pain it caused. I regret the years I lost with my mother. I regret what it cost my family, my mother's isolation before she joined me. She squeezed his hand. But I don't regret choosing to feel, choosing to love you, choosing to be myself rather than what I was told to be. She looked back at the painting, at the figure stepping toward light. Every tear was worth it. Every moment of fear, every ache of loss, every struggle to understand who I was without the framework I'd been given. Worth it. Because I'm alive, Declan. Really, truly alive. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. His arms came around her, pulling her close. I love you, Elena Hayes. Every day, every moment, every version of you that's been and is and will be. I love you too. She said it easily now, these words that had once been impossible. Thank you for teaching me that it was safe to love, safe to feel, safe to be human. You taught yourself, I just paid attention. And they stood together in the quiet museum before the painting of courage, and Elena thought about the girl she'd been 5 years ago. Silent, controlled, empty, living a half-life and calling it strength. And she thought about the woman she'd become, messy, emotional, deeply fully human, living completely and calling it worth the cost. Come on, she said, taking Declan's hand. Mom's expecting us for dinner. She's making her version of American pot roast. Is it going to be edible? Probably not, but we'll eat it anyway and tell her it's wonderful. Because that's what family does. Because that's what love does. They walked out of the museum hand in hand, past paintings of sorrow and joy, past images of humanity in all its messy glory, into the summer evening that smelled of possibilities. Behind them, the painted figure stood on its threshold, forever captured in that moment of choosing, forever brave, forever free, forever stepping toward light. Elena Soren Hayes became a leading advocate for Valdorian cultural reform publishing, groundbreaking research on emotional intelligence and human rights. In 2026, Valdoria began tentative cultural exchanges focused on emotional wellness, influenced by international pressure and internal reform movements led by counselor Katya Kozlov. Elena and Declan Hayes were married in Boston in July 2025. Dr. Helen Garrison officiated. They remain happily married, still choosing each other every way. In 2027, Elena's mother emigrated to America. They had 5 years together before her mother passed peacefully in 2032, surrounded by family, having learned at last what it meant to love without fear. Counselor Katya Kozlov and Irina Kozlov were reunited in 2028 after 30 years of separation. Katya resigned from the Valdorian Council to join her daughter in Boston. In 2030, Valdoria abolished mandatory emotion suppression for minors. In 2030, the practice was banned entirely. Ambassador Gregor Petrov was tried for crimes against humanity in 2031. He died in detention in 2034. Elena returned to Valdoria for the first time in 2035, not as an exile, but as an honored guest invited to speak at the dedication of the Memorial for Emotional Freedom. She cried at the airport. Everyone cried with her. Some truths are worth the tears. Some choices are worth everything they cost. And sometimes the simplest words, "you're beautiful," spoken with sincerity and seen with clarity, can change not just a life, but a world.